All right, welcome to the deep dive. You sent us some really fascinating stuff, some pretty intense excerpts, I gotta say, from Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a book that has a reputation for being pretty challenging, pretty dense. So, our mission today, right, is to really unpack some of those big ideas for you. We're talking the
Mm.
Superman, the whole critique of traditional values, the will to power. Like, what was Nietzsche really getting at?
I think that's a great way to put it. Tackling Dust Spade Zarathustra, it can feel a bit like climbing a philosophical mountain. But, the view from the top, totally worth it. We're going to help you navigate the terrain, really try to distill these potent insights that have really resonated, I think, for well over a century now.
Okay, so to set the stage a little bit, Nietzsche started writing this book in, well, not the most ideal of circumstances. Like, picture this, right? Cold, rainy winter in Rapallo, early 1880s. He was actually going through a lot personally.
Hmm.
And yet, out of that difficult period, this incredible, thought-provoking work emerged. It's kind of interesting to think about, right?
Yeah.
Something so challenging for readers was born out of a time of, well, real personal struggle for Nietzsche. It makes me think of that quote, attributed to Master Eckhart: the fleetest beast to bear you to perfection is suffering. Maybe that context of hardship is actually like a key to understanding just how intense, how radical these ideas really are.
I think that's spot on. That connection between difficulty, hardship, and profound intellectual, even personal growth. It's
Yeah.
definitely a recurring theme in Nietzsche's work.
Yeah.
And it does suggest that real transformation, the kind that shakes you to your core, it often comes from facing challenges head on.
Right. So let's dive into, I think, what's probably the most talked about and often misunderstood idea in Zarathustra, the Superman. Now, I think when most people hear Superman, they immediately picture, comic books, capes, flying. But Nietzsche's concept, the Übermensch in the original German, is a whole different ballgame. So based on like your notes on the book and my notes on the book, it's definitely not about creating some kind of biologically superior race or anything like that, right?
Not at all. When Nietzsche talks about the rearing of the Superman, what he's really talking about is a fundamental reevaluation of our values. What do we consider good, bad, important? It's about humanity evolving, but not in a physical sense, more in terms of creating new and higher values that shape the way we think and act. To really get this, I think we need to look at Nietzsche's pretty critical view of Christianity. He saw it as originating from the resentment of the botched and the weak. Essentially, he believed it had undermined the qualities, things like strength, beauty, pride, power, the very things that, to him, signify a vibrant, life-affirming existence.
So in his view, Christianity kind of flipped the script on what we traditionally see as good and bad, elevating weakness, suppressing those natural instincts for vitality and strength.
That's exactly.
And that, he argued, led to a weak, suffering, and modern race.
Precisely. So his proposed solution, well, it's nothing short of a complete overhaul of our value system, what he calls a new table of valuations.
Mm.
This new system would be centered on, and this is a quote, the strong, mighty, and magnificent man. Someone who embraces life fully, strives for their absolute highest potential. That's the Superman.
Okay.
And the core principle of this new way of valuing things, Nietzsche lays it out very clearly. Another quote for you. All that proceeds from power is good. All that springs from weakness is bad.
Wow. That's a really stark statement. And to be honest, it's kind of a complete reversal of traditional morality, right?
Right.
And our listener out there, you might be finding this a little morally unsettling. I think it's important to remember here that even in the book, Zarathustra's greatest discovery, it turned out, was all too human.
Right.
That kind of hints that the Superman isn't some perfect being already walking amongst us. It's more like a future ideal, a goal for humanity to work towards.
Absolutely. That nuance is essential. The Superman, it's not a finished product. It's more like a direction, a possibility that, lies ahead of us. And to get there, to achieve that, to surpass our limitations, it demands what Nietzsche calls a new healthiness.
A new healthiness. Okay. That's an interesting term. I'm guessing it's not just about, eating your vegetables and hitting the gym, right?
No. This
Uh,
new healthiness is much bigger. It's stronger, sharper, tougher, bolder, even more joyful than anything we can really grasp right now.
okay.
Think of it as complete vitality, one that integrates our physical, intellectual, and spiritual sides. And Nietzsche actually talks about these argonauts of the ideal. These are courageous individuals who venture into the full spectrum of human experience. They're constantly questioning, redefining the boundaries of what we consider acceptable, good, valuable.
So these Argonauts are always in this process of sacrificing and reacquiring their great healthiness. It sounds like a pretty dynamic, ongoing journey, like a lot of challenge and renewal, right? And the space they're exploring, Nietzsche calls it an undiscovered country that lies beyond our current ideals.
Mhm.
He describes it as full of, well, everything, really. Beautiful, strange, questionable, frightful, even divine. It's like a picture of constant exploration, a refusal to be bound by conventional thinking.
That's it, exactly. And it's from this vantage point, the perspective of the Superman, this need for profound healthiness, that Zarathustra looks at the man of the present day with what Nietzsche describes as ill-concealed amusement.
Amusement, huh? Because our current aims, our hopes, they just seem so small, so limited compared to this potential.
Exactly. From that elevated perspective, from the higher ideal, the everyday worries, ambitions of regular folks, they just seem rather insignificant. Nietzsche brings up this strange, tempting ideal full of danger. He describes it as a spirit that playfully interacts with everything we consider sacred. Even the things we value most highly, they could be seen as limitations from this wider view.
It's a pretty radical challenge,
Oh, yeah.
like suggesting that what we hold most dear might actually be holding us back from something greater. This line of thought, it leads directly to Zarathustra's rejection of, well, what he calls super-earthly hopes.
Yes. Zarathustra is very clear, very strong in his insistence that we should remain true to the earth. He condemns those who promote super-earthly hopes as poisoners. By that, he's referring to any beliefs or values that focus on a transcendent reality, an afterlife that diminishes the value of our present earthly existence. Think of, like, traditional promises of heaven that might devalue our current life. He says that since the death of God, the biggest blasphemy isn't against the divine being anymore, it's against the earth itself. To focus on another realm over the here and now, over our earthly existence, that's the dreadfulest sin.
So we should be focusing on realizing our potential right here in this world, rather than looking ahead to some kind of afterlife or divine reward, right?
Yeah.
And this concept of the Superman becomes, as Nietzsche puts it, the sea where our great contempt can be submerged. That's a pretty powerful image.
It is. This hour of great contempt, it's a pivotal moment in Nietzsche's thinking. It's that point where your own satisfaction, your own reasoning, even your own virtues, they become loathsome. This feeling of being dissatisfied with yourself, with the world, the way things are, it's a necessary step to creating new values and striving for the Superman, that feeling of being completely dissatisfied with yourself and the world. It's something a lot of people experience, even if they don't take it to the same philosophical extremes that Nietzsche did. What do you think makes this contempt so important in moving towards something greater?
I think it's like a breaking point, where the old ways of thinking, of being, they just don't cut it anymore. It creates this void that needs to be filled with something new, something with more meaning. From this place of contempt, Zarathustra really admires a specific kind of person, the lavish soul.
Yes, the lavish soul, those who give freely without expecting anything back, those who are bold, exceed their promises,
Right.
those who justify the future ones, sacrifice their present comfort for their ideals, those who actively seek their own downgoing in service of something greater than themselves.
This idea of downgoing, it's really interesting. It's not about, destroying yourself. It's about overcoming yourself, sacrificing the current you for future possibilities, for the Superman. It's the total opposite of the last man, who Zarathustra brings up as a warning.
The last man is a chilling figure, really. The complete opposite of the Superman. Totally content, self-satisfied, lacking any ambition, seeks comfort, avoids hardship, values equality above everything, to the point where anyone who wants more is seen as disruptive. It's a society where everyone just wants to, watch TV and be comfortable with no interest in challenge or meaning. That's the stagnation Nietzsche is warning us about.
A kind of comfortable stagnation where all the striving, all the challenges, they're gone. But so is any real purpose beyond just surviving, enjoying those superficial pleasures. And Nietzsche's critique, it even extends to the state itself, which he famously calls, and this is a direct quote, the coldest of all cold monsters.
Right. He sees the state as this false idol that claims to represent the people, but is actually spreading lies.
Wow.
It seduces people with security and convenience, but in return, it demands their devotion, their virtue. He paints a pretty grim picture of the state as a place where the slow suicide of all is called life.
So it's like the state standardizes everyone, diminishes individual potential, promotes this kind of collective mediocrity.
Exactly.
And he contrasts this with the idea that real individuality, the man who is not superfluous, only emerges when the state's influence fades away.
Right. And this journey away from the collective towards the Übermensch is illuminated by Nietzsche's idea of the three metamorphoses of the spirit.
Okay, yeah, the camel, the lion, and the child. Can you break those down for us?
Sure. So the spirit, it starts out as a camel, patiently bearing the burdens of tradition,
Yeah.
the thou shalt of morality. Then it transforms into a lion, strong, independent, roaring, nay to those inherited values.
Mm.
Finally, it becomes a child, a state of innocence, a fresh start, able to say yay to its own self-created values.
It's like a progression from obedience to rebellion to finally this creative affirmation.
Exactly.
And speaking of how we relate to others, Zarathustra has some pretty unconventional advice about love of neighbor.
He does. He actually advises us to, and this is a quote, flee from neighbor love. Instead, we should cultivate a love for the furthest and future ones, even for things and phantoms.
Wow. Okay.
His reasoning is that focusing on the immediate community, the thou, is a more primitive instinct than developing the individual I. So to grow, to create new values for the future, we need to look beyond our immediate circle.
So it's like a more far-sighted love, not limited by the immediate needs of those around us.
Right.
And he also warns against the good and just, which seems kind of counterintuitive, right?
He does. Zarathustra warns us to be wary of the good and just because they often resent those who make their own virtues, the lonesome ones.
Right.
He argues that the good can often be the beginning of the end because they want to maintain the status quo. They end up trying to crucify those who bring new values that challenge their own.
So those who challenge the existing order, who want something more than what's accepted, they're often seen as a threat by the so-called morally righteous. And this leads us to two of Nietzsche's most central and often debated ideas, the will to power and eternal recurrence.
Okay?
Now, the will to power, it's not just about, dominating others. It's more like an inner drive to grow, to become stronger in every way, intellectually, creatively, emotionally, to leave your mark on the world. It's the energy behind self-overcoming, creating values, striving for the Superman. And then there's eternal recurrence, this idea that everything will repeat infinitely, exactly as it has been.
Right? Every joy, every sorrow, every single detail, all happening again and again eternally.
Wow. Just thinking about that every single moment, the good and the bad coming back over and over, Zarathustra himself really struggles with this concept initially, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely. It's a very daunting thought, the weight of it all. And Zarathustra definitely grapples with that. But ultimately, he comes to embrace it. He sees it as the ultimate test of whether you truly love life. Would you willingly experience everything again exactly the same way forever? It's a powerful way to gauge your acceptance of existence.
And all of this is tied to Nietzsche's famous declaration of the death of God.
Absolutely. The death of God, it's not meant literally. It's more about recognizing that the old foundations of our beliefs, of our values, they've crumbled. The idea of a divine source for meaning, it doesn't hold the same weight anymore. It leaves a void, but also an opportunity to create our own values, our own meaning. And that's a central part of becoming the Superman. The important thing to remember is that it's not an empty nihilistic void. It's a space where you have the power to define your own meaning and purpose.
So the death of God necessitates the birth of the Superman, someone who can forge their own path in a world without those old divine guidelines. And Zarathustra's teachings, they're not for everyone, are they? He's talking to a very specific audience, the higher men.
Exactly. Those who can push beyond their limitations, who are ready to embrace these new values.
Right.
He's pretty disappointed, even weary, with those who don't get it, who cling to the old ways.
Throughout the book, he meets all sorts of people who represent those limitations, those misunderstandings. And throughout his journey, his teachings, he's constantly battling what he calls the spirit of gravity.
The spirit of gravity.
Yeah.
It's a metaphor for everything that weighs us down. Pessimism, resignation, blindly following conventional morality, fear of the unknown. The things that keep us stuck in the past, that prevent us from reaching for something greater, something more, from ascending to the Superman.
So overcoming that spirit of gravity is key, and it all comes back to that recurring theme, self-overcoming.
Right.
Constantly pushing yourself to become more than you are now. And that's not always going to be easy or comfortable. It often means facing suffering head on.
Indeed. Nietzsche doesn't see suffering as something to avoid at all costs. It can be a catalyst for growth, for becoming stronger, more resilient. and ultimately for achieving a greater version of yourself, as that quote about suffering being the fastest path to perfection suggests.
But it's not all doom and gloom, right? There's
Yeah.
also this emphasis on joy, on laughter.
Absolutely. Joy and laughter are essential expressions of a life fully lived. They're tools for breaking free from that spirit of gravity. They represent lightness, a willingness to embrace the absurdity and the beauty of it all.
So as we come to the end of this deep dive into Thus Spake Zarathustra, I think our listeners left with a pretty big question. In a world without those traditional certainties, what new values will you embrace?
Yeah.
And what form will your Superman take? It's a question that still resonates today.
Absolutely. And we've just scratched the surface here, but hopefully this has shed some light on the big ideas. The Superman as a future goal, questioning those old values, the importance of self-overcoming, and the impact of the death of God.
And you, our listener, engaging with these complex, challenging ideas, it really shows a commitment to inquiry, to growth.
Yeah.
And that's something we deeply value here on the Deep Dive. Thank you for sharing your sources with us, for going on this intellectual adventure with us.
Thank you.
Keep exploring Nietzsche's ideas. See how they resonate with your own journey, with your own understanding of the world.
It's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely. All right, until next time, happy reading, and keep those deep dives coming.